Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the sewing studio with a fun little project. See, I'm beaming again. This happens when I work on, well, most things to be honest, let's be fair. Now, I was asked, would I do a Halloween project? And I love the colours of Halloween, so of course I said yes. But I am very conscious that here in the UK, a lot of us don't celebrate Halloween very much. You know, it's very big over across the pond, as it were, in the US, but here in the UK, quite often it sort of slips a lot of us by. So I've designed something that even though I've done it in Halloween, I'm thinking you could just do this as an autumn project. Now this is a little runner and I've designed it specifically. I've got a long, sort of fairly narrow unit in my lounge that I like to sort of decorate. And so this is specifically sized to fit on top of that. Now you'll notice it's not quite finished with the binding, and I'll come back to that at the end. But in this tutorial, we're just going to sort of focus on the blocks and how I made this little runner. Now, as it stands, it measures 40 by about 14 and a quarter. I think by the time I did the quilting, it sort of shrunk it down by about 1/4 of an inch. And I can't go any wider. My little unit, that's about the width I can get on my little unit without it sort of falling over the edges. But if you wanted to make this longer, or of course wider, you could definitely very easily just add a second border. I would probably put something on like a sort of a nice thick sort of 3-inch border, but you might also want to size that depending on the size of your table or whatever area you're going to be putting it into. I call this my pinwheel pumpkins. And it's all done from 2.5-inch pieces of fabric. Now I've been working with a scrap bag. This was mine that I purchased. With my own hard-earned money. Well, I don't know, is it very hard-earned sewing? I don't know. And it's Halloween, and this one was called Spellbound, and I think it might have been last year's fabrics, and it's Sweet Fire Road is the design. It's a Moda scrap bag. And I was really lucky in this scrap bag that I had, the strips were wide enough that I could get 2.5-inch strips out of, but the sort of the warning, if you like, or the caveat with the scrap bag is you never quite know how wide the strips are going to be. So if you want to play safe, you know, get a jelly roll, or even layer cakes would do this, but you do need pieces that come up to 8.5 inches. So a charm pack wouldn't quite do it unless you made them really scrappy and put lots of little pieces together to make your pumpkins. That would work. So if you've got a charm pack with Halloween fabric, you could make it work. So you're going to need some strips. I will give you the measurements for each block, and then you've got the ability to adapt it. And we'll also put that down in the description so you can get to it. And then I also used about 1/2 metre of background fabric. Now this is a Moda Grunge, and I think it was called Marble, and it took just under 1/2 metre. So enough jibber jabber, shall we get on and shall we make one of the pinwheels? I start with the pinwheels. Now I'm actually going to show you 2 ways, because I always sort of say to people, the method I choose for my half square triangles will depend on how many half square triangles I need to make, but also the size of my fabric. Now, because I was working with strips, I chose to use a half square triangle ruler. Now, this is the one I always grab for. I've got a few half square triangle rulers, but this is my favourite. This is the, it's actually it's labelled as a 6-inch flying geese 45-90 degree triangle, and it's creative grids, and it looks a bit intimidating, and I've said this before I think when I've showed it, but basically it's 2 triangles that have been sort of stuck together, as it were. So there's this top half here is the half square triangle, and this bottom bit is a 1/4 square triangle, and they're the 2 units you need to make flying geese. But I use this anytime I need to cut half square triangles or 1/4 square triangles. This is the ruler I grab for. However, as I said, there are other half square triangle rulers. And the other one I've grabbed to show you is this one. And let me put this one under the close-up. And it's the folded corner clipper. Now, this is sort of designed to do these snowballed corners. Now, I didn't use this for this because I didn't want to do it that people needed a speciality ruler. I've done it in a way that if you haven't got any speciality rulers, you can still make it. But this also cuts half square triangles. So if you've got either of these already in your stash, you can use either or any other ruler that will cut half square triangles. So I'm going to start and show you that first, but then I will also show you how to make the half square triangles if you haven't got a half square triangle ruler, still from the squares and strips basically. So these are my little bits of strips that I've got, let's put that one there, that I've got left, and they were 2.5 inches. I've cut them to 2.5 inches. With the scrap bags as well, I always sort of say they're not for the faint-hearted. You do have a bit of cutting and trimming to do on them. Now I'm going to sort of start by just straightening up that edge there, and I just flip the ruler over and make a cut, and then we've just got a nice, put that in the rubbish, and then we've got a nice straight edge to begin with. And then I'm literally just going to, let me put that under the close-up again. I'm just going to lay the 2.5 inch line here on the bottom of the 2.5 inch strip, and you'll be able to see that the top, and it's got a blunt top, and that means we'll have no dog ear there. And there we are, there we've got our half square triangle. And then once we've done one, I can flip the ruler around so it's now facing towards me. Let me just move that over a little bit so I'm not fighting with that slightly uneven bit of surface there. And then I'm going to cut again. So there you can see we've got our half square triangles. So let me just quickly do that on my background. I think from a strip you need about 7 inches to get 4 half square triangles from a strip. So it's about 3.5 inches every 2 half square triangles using a ruler. So that's our pieces for our half squares. So where I'm working with strips, that is the method that I will choose to make my half square triangles. Now with those, they rely on having a sort of perfect 1/4 inch, if you like. The ruler has got the 1/4 inch seam allowance designed into it. So I'm going to need to make sure that I'm accurate with my 1/4 inch when I do my pieces like that. Now I'm just going to put those on top of each other for a minute. And I will give you a little hint actually. When you're doing triangles, because they're hand cut, we don't always cut them perfectly because we're not machines. So always, the bit I watch is this corner here. So if you get those two lined up, you should get a good square. And if you sort of look quite closely at that, you'll see that my orange is slightly protruding from that. That's not going to matter, that's going to come out in the seam allowance. The bit I watch is if you get that right, your half square triangle should be square. If you try and match those up, that's quite often where your half square triangle starts sort of getting a bit short or possibly getting a bit large. So watch that corner, that's the important one there. Now while we're at the machine, I'll show you this method of doing it, and this is with squares. So basically I've taken my strip and I've cut them into 2.5 inch squares. Now there's a little bit more waste with this method, but as I said, it doesn't require any specialist rulers to do it. So I'm just going to draw a line. Now I'm going to use this one, and I'm just using that straight edge to go from corner to corner. And so I've drawn that on the back, on the reverse of the background fabric, and I've got those fabrics right sides together. So I can take that to the machine now and sew, and we want to sew just slightly to the outside edge of that central line. We don't want to do 1/4 inch either side because that would be too small. So we're going to end up sort of losing this part of the fabric for that. So let's say there's a little bit more waste that way, but you can still make the half square triangles from your strips if you cut the strips into 2.5 inch squares. Now, if you're working from larger pieces of fabric to make your half square triangles, and you want to do this method where you sew 1/4 inch either side of the line, your squares need to be 3 inches. So should we take those to the machine? So I'm going to start with my small triangles first. Now you'll see I've started on a little scrap piece, and that's because we're starting on a really thin piece of fabric there, and quite often what will happen is the machine will, the needle will push that down, so it sort of tends to be a bit happier if we start off something else. And if you remember what I said about that, making sure those corners match. So there's the 2 ones we've cut. Now I'm going to take this other one that we're doing without having cut it, and like I say, we're just going to line that up. So that's my pieces all done. So I'm just going to clip those apart. So on these, all we need to do now is cut off these little dog ears. You'll see on the triangles, one has got a blunt side and one has got the triangle. So I just tend to follow that little blunt bit there, and that will just get rid of the dog ears. And then on this one, let's see which side actually we can do it with that, because that grey bit there, between that line and the edge, is my 1/4 inch. I'm just going to trim off. So let me put that under the close-up. So I'm just very conscious that we've got some new quilters. I see comments from new quilters. So that's what that looks like. So that's the line we've drawn. We've just sewn slightly to the outside of that, and that's just to allow for that fold when we open it. And that's our little bit of waste that we're going to have. But that means that we've been able to make that half square triangle without any specialist rulers. So now I tend to just sort of finger press these back quite carefully, because that's a bias edge, so there will be stretch in it. And all that means is we've sewn across the fabric at a 45-degree angle. And the same with these. And then we'll take this to the iron and give them a press. Now when we're pressing these, and we should say pressing rather than ironing, because of that bias edge, because of that 45-degree, I tend not to try and move my iron too much. So I'm just going to let the heat of the iron go through and do its work. And there's our nice little half square triangles ready for our pinwheel. So I've got 4 here all done, because what I tended to do with these, I think these would look perfect if they were scrappy. They don't have to all be the same fabric, but for this I chose to use the same fabrics for the pinwheels in the centres, and I've actually got some made here. So we can take these to the, actually I'm fibbing, look, I've used 2 different fabrics. I might have thought that. Oh, let's do a fairly scrappy one. Now, my method of putting pinwheels together, I start with this sort of top left one and have the colour here, and then the next one, lay it on top, 1/4 twist, lay it on top, 1/4 twist, lay it on top, 1/4 twist, and then we're just going to do it so that they nest up. And because we've pressed the seam towards the dark fabric on both of those, those seams are going in opposite directions. And there's that one. And this is where I have to be careful that I don't turn them around when I walk over to the machine. At home I have them next to me, so I don't have the same issue. But that looks right. Let me put them there, because you've got sort of the seam doing that. So we're going to take those to the machine, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch down both sides, and then we'll put the 2 bits together. So I'm just going to start on my little scrap piece again, just because we're working with small pieces. Ooh, I left the scissors miles away. Just going to clip them, and then I'm going to open that out. And I tend to press towards the solid fabric. And I'm just going to finger press at this point, stay at the machine. Once again, that centre seam, the seams should nest, because our seams are going in opposite directions. Now the other thing to watch here, and let me just grab a pen as I approach it, because there's a point here where the 2 seams will cross, and it's right there. And that's the tip of the pinwheels. So when I'm sewing this bit here now, I'm going to make sure that I either go straight through that or very slightly to the right. If I go to the left of that, I'll chop off the ends of my pinwheels, which, you know, it's not the end of the world, but that may not be the look you're going for. So if I need to swing that needle in a little bit, I do. It's magnetised. Now let's see how we did. Yeah, look, that's looking pretty good. There's our pinwheel. Now for this seam, I'm going to press that one open, because we don't need it to match with anything. There we are, and there's our pinwheel. All nice and done, and our points are looking pretty good as well. And that's what I say, I call it X marks the spot, where you just have to watch where you take that seam. So that's the centre. So once we've got our centre, we can start to add the outside bit here, and that just comes from strips. So here are my strips here. So for the sides, or for the tops and bottoms, depending on which way you want to do it, I might go top and bottom actually. I need 2 pieces that are 2.5 by 4.5. I'm just going to overcut that and just trim that back to 4.5 in a minute because I've got a bit of a raggedy edge there. 4.5. And when I'm cutting, I just make sure that that line that I'm using, let me put that under the close-up actually. I say, and I might do it on the smaller ruler just so that you can see it more easily. Just, let's say, for beginner quilters again, as well. So I'm going 4.5, so that's my 4.5 inch line there. And I'm just going to make sure it sits on top of the fabric at that edge, not to the left of the edge. Does that make sense? So I'm just going to exaggerate that a minute. So if my line was off the end here, you're undercutting by the width of that line. So you want that line to sit just on the edge on top of the fabric. And then you are cutting your 4.5 inches. So we want 2 pieces that are 2.5 by 4.5, and then I need my big ruler because we need 2 pieces that are 2.5 by 8.5. So I had so much fun doing these, and they didn't take long, so you've still got time to make one for Halloween. There we are. So I think you need about 26 inches in total for the strips for the outside of the pumpkin. So I'm going to put that to one side. I'm going to start by putting that, like I say, on the sides or on the top. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. So I'm going to add those, and then once I've added those, I can add my 2 sides. So let's go to the machine and do that. I'm just going to finger press that back and keep adding the other sides. Now, if you wanted to press those back with the iron, you can. I tend to just finger press them, reduce how many trips I need to make to the iron. Right, I'm just going to use pins on this because this strip is getting a bit longer now. So there's our block all sewn. I'm having to tidy up again, look, and I'm going to take that to the iron and give those a press. And for all of those seams, I've pressed them towards the strips that we've added. So that's what it's looking like on the back there, all nice and neat. So that's the starting of the blocks. Now we need to turn it into a pumpkin shape, and we're just going to do that by snowballing the corners. So what I've got are 4 2-inch squares, and I'm going to turn them over again and draw a line corner to corner. And then that's going to be a line, just making sure I'm doing it on the right side of the grunge. Now we're going to put those on like so, so that it's going to go from corner to corner. I might as well place all of these. Now if you wanted to check the size of your block at this point, that might be a good idea. Right, hold on Jeanette, let's orientate that in the right way. So they're going in towards each other there. And then and like so. So you can see, let me put that there. So that one's going, pointing inwards, and that one's going from right to left. And on all of these, we're going to sew just to the outside of this line, so more towards the edges. I am going to start on my little piece again, just in case we have any problems. So what I normally do at this point is I just fold that corner back and just check that I'm happy with where that is coming out. And I am. If I wasn't, I would unpick that seam and redo it. But as long as you stay close to that line, you should be good enough. So let's give those a press. And once I know I'm happy with them, then I'll go back and trim off the excess bits of fabric. So just to confirm again, they were 2-inch squares that we've added to the corners. So we're beginning to get our pumpkin shape. Now we just need to add the little stalk, 1.5 by 2 inches, that one is, and that's 1.5 by 2 1/4 or 2.5. And basically what's going to happen is we're going to add that bit to that bit. Now why have you oversized that quite so much, Jeanette? Because I didn't want to fiddle about with tiny little pieces, because if you look here, let me put it under the close-up, you've got a tiny little piece. So you could make that smaller, but I tended to just work with a piece that I had left and then trim it back, because you end up with this tiny little 1/2 inch by 1.5 inch piece here, or 1 inch piece. So I'm just going to put those two together. I think that was an offcut, so I just thought, well, it's the width. So we're just going to sew that together with a 1/4 inch seam. And once that's together, I'm going to take my other background strips, which are these here, which are 2.5 by 4 inches. And then once you've got that on, we can add on our side pieces, but just make sure that you line them up with your stalk fabric, not this piece of fabric. So these edges need to line up there. So I hope that makes sense, but you will have some overhang there. But as I said, we're going to trim that. And I found it much easier to work with an oversized piece than fiddling about with a tiny little piece, because it is actually quite small. And then I fold, actually I'm going to fold towards the background. There's less resistance there. And then this one again. And so there's our little stalk. Choose where you want your stalk to go if you've got a particular preference. I don't think I have. Now, actually, it might have been easier if we trim those to size, but I'm not going to worry about it if you haven't, because all I'm going to do is fold that in half. Now, if you had your pieces trimmed to 2.5 by 4, they should fit exactly. But if, like me, you're just going with what you've got, just line it up in the centre. let's just move that out of the way. Now I'm just going to trim off. Now this should come out at 8.5 by 10 inches. So I'm just going to chop that off. Measure across there, 8.5. So there's the pumpkin block. So you just make 4 of those or more if you want it longer. I was showing somebody at my quilt group this, and somebody said, oh, did you realise your pumpkins aren't all going the same way? And it's like, no, I've done that on purpose. If you had the pumpkins all going the same way, they would all line up because we've got this extra piece with the stalk. So by putting them one way and one the other, it means that you stagger them, you get more of a flow, and it looks sort of less regimented. But of course you can choose however you want to do it. But I liked this way. And I also like the fact that actually on a runner, you quite often will see it from more than one side. So there isn't a direction to it anyway. So they just go in like so. I join them with I cut 2-inch pieces of fabric, so that will finish at 1.5 inches. So I joined them with 2-inch pieces, so that was 3 strips of 2 inches to go in there. And then I added 2.5-inch strips around the edge for a border. As I said, if you wanted it wider, you could definitely put sort of another border, or make this border thinner and then put a sort of thicker border on. But that size fits my little unit perfectly, so I've left it at that. So just a little bit about the quilting, and I will just mention about the binding, because I'm going to do a scrappy binding again on this one. I had some strips left, so I thought I might as well do a scrappy binding on it. And we're actually going to film that as another tutorial because it's a slightly different method than we did in the scrappy binding tutorial we did a little while back, which we'll put a link to. So I'm actually going to be joining this one with a mitered seam. So I'm going to show you that. And also to address a couple of comments that we had about, can you show us how you do the corners on the back? So I thought this would be a good opportunity to use this to address those comments. So the quilting on it, let me just bring it in, and I don't know if we can get a bit of a close-up. But I did this on my embroidery machine. Now the quilting pattern didn't come with the embroidery machine. They are separate patterns that I've bought for it. And you can buy the patterns for different machines. Now I've got a Brother V3 machine, and this one has got pumpkins on it, and I just wanted to do this. Now I had to hoop this about 8 times to get the coverage, and I actually sort of did it so I was sort of going in that way. So it was sort of 2 across and 4 down. And I also staggered the pattern, so I didn't want all the pumpkins to line up once again. So it probably took me about a good 2 hours, I would say, to get this quilted, because I said there was lots of lining up and re-hooping to do on this. But this is sort of the perfect size project, really, for quilting on my embroidery machine. I don't do big projects on it. You find the weight of it sort of works against you, but something like this was absolutely perfect. And let me just show you the back. This is a piece of fabric I just had in my stash. You can probably see the pumpkins a bit better there on the back. So I hope you enjoyed that little project. I hope you give it a go. My Pinwheel pumpkins, like I say, it's a nice, quick, easy one. I always start by making the pinwheels, and I sort of chain pieced all of those, and all that means is you sort of sew one after the other, and it goes quite quickly. But it's a really nice, simple block and really lots of fun. But as I said, if you're not into Halloween fabric, just do it in your nice golds and rusts and beautiful autumnal colours, and it will look just as pretty. So thank you very much for spending some time with me here today. If you've enjoyed this video, do like, comment, share, subscribe, all of those things that help support us here at the Sewing Studio. And I hope you'll join us again here in the Sewing Studio.